Before I tell you what happened at my brother's wedding, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in so much pain that you couldn't speak and the people who were supposed to love you most just looked away? Drop a yes in the comments if you know that feeling. Because what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about my family and about myself. I grew up as the middle child in the Calloway house, and if you know anything about middle children, you know that we learn early how to make ourselves small. My older sister, Dana, was the responsible one, the straight-A student, the one my parents bragged about at church. My younger brother, Marcus, was the athlete. The golden one, the one whose travel baseball schedule restructured our entire family calendar from the time he was 9 years old. And then there was me, Claire, the one who was just there. I don't say this to be dramatic. I say it because context matters when you're trying to understand how a family can watch someone suffer and convince themselves they're seeing something else entirely. Marcus was 4 years younger than me. By the time I was in high school, he was already the kind of kid that coaches called special. And I mean that in the most loaded way possible. He had a fastball that made grown men stop breathing, and he had a smile that made everyone forget when he did something wrong, which happened more than people like to admit. He was loud at dinner, he broke things. He said cruel things, and called them jokes. And my parents, especially my father, laughed, because the alternative was acknowledging that their golden boy had a mean streak that ran deep. I was 17 when Marcus first really hurt me. Not emotionally. Physically. We were in the backyard, and I was reading on the porch steps. He wanted me to move so he could practice his pitching drills, and I told him I'd move in a minute. He didn't wait a minute. He grabbed the back of my lawn chair and yanked it hard, and I went backward off the porch. I hit the concrete pad below with my elbow and the side of my hip. I lay there for a moment, stunned, the wind completely knocked out of me. My mother came to the back door. She looked at me on the ground, and then she looked at Marcus, and then she said, "Claire, stop being so dramatic and come help me set the table." That was the moment I understood my role in this family. Fast forward 11 years. Marcus was 26. He had made it to the minor leagues, which in my parents' world was more or less equivalent to being appointed to the Supreme Court. He was getting married to a woman named Jessie Sweetgirl, genuinely, and I always felt sorry that she was walking into something she didn't fully understand yet. The wedding was in Savannah, Georgia, at a beautiful outdoor venue on the water. My parents had spent more money on this event than they had contributed to either Dana's or my college education combined. But we didn't talk about that. I flew in from Denver, where I had built what I considered a pretty good life. I was 31. I worked in hospital administration. I had an apartment I loved, a therapist I trusted, and a carefully managed relationship with my family that involved just enough distance to keep me functional. I flew in on a Thursday. The wedding was Saturday. I had told myself I could survive 48 hours. The rehearsal dinner was Friday evening at a steakhouse downtown. The whole family was there, my parents, Dana and her husband, various aunts and uncles, Marcus's teammates and their wives, Jessie's family. The kind of big, loud event where you could disappear into the crowd if you worked at it. I was working at it. Marcus found me at the bar between the appetizer course and the main course. He was already loud, not drunk exactly, but loose in the way that people who have been drinking since noon get loose. He threw his arm around my shoulders and I could smell the whiskey. "There she is," he said, too close to my ear. "My boring sister." A few people nearby laughed. I smiled the smile I had been practicing since I was 17. "Congratulations, Marcus," I said. "Jessie looks beautiful." "She does, doesn't she?" He squeezed my shoulder hard. "You should try smiling like that sometime. You look like you're at a funeral." I said nothing. This was the strategy that had served me for 31 years. He moved on, and I breathed. I ate my dinner. I talked to Jessie's mother, who was a retired school librarian from Savannah and genuinely one of the most interesting people I had ever met. I was doing fine. The problem happened after dinner. The restaurant had a private outdoor terrace for our group, and people had drifted outside for the warm evening air and the open bar. I was standing near the railing, looking out at the water, when I heard Marcus's voice behind me doing some impression of someone, one of his teammates maybe. People were laughing. I didn't turn around. What I didn't realize was that he was doing the impression while walking toward me, facing the crowd behind him, not watching where he was going. Or maybe he saw me and thought it would be funny. I genuinely still don't know which version is true. What I know is that he walked into me hard, and because I was standing at the railing with my weight forward, I went over. The terrace was elevated about 5 feet above a lower stone pathway. I fell 5 feet and landed on my left side on old Savannah cobblestone. The sound I heard was wrong. Not just the impact, something in my body made a sound that I had never heard before and hoped to never hear again. The pain was immediate and total. I could not breathe. I lay on the cobblestone and I could hear voices above me on the terrace, and I could not make my lungs work and I could not speak. The first voice I heard clearly was my mother's. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said. "Claire." The second voice I heard was my father's, somewhere close. "She's okay. She just got the wind knocked out of her." Marcus leaned over the railing. Even through the shock and the pain, I could see his face, not scared, not sorry, annoyed. "I barely touched her," he said. She was right there, I didn't even see her. Someone, one of Jesse's cousins, I found out later, had come down the side stairs to where I was. She crouched next to me and touched my shoulder gently. "Can you tell me where it hurts?" she asked. I tried to tell her everywhere. What came out was a sound. My father came down the stairs. He stood over me and looked at me with the particular expression he reserved for situations where I was inconveniencing him. "Claire, can you stand up?" I shook my head. Even that small movement sent pain radiating from my left side in waves that made my vision blur. "She needs a doctor," Jesse's cousin said. She looked up at my father with the directness of someone who had no previous relationship with our family dynamic. She could have broken something. "She's fine," my father said. "Claire, as she does this, she'll be fine in a minute. I want you to sit with that for a second. I want you to understand what it means when a parent looks at their child lying on cobblestone, unable to breathe, and says she does this. As though pain is a performance. As though I had a history of throwing myself off terraces for attention. Jesse's cousin, her name was Amber, and I will be grateful to her for the rest of my life, looked at my father for a long moment. Then she looked back at me. "I'm going to call 911, she said quietly. "Okay, just stay still." My father said, "That is completely unnecessary." Amber called 911. While we waited, my mother came down the stairs. She stood next to my father and looked at me in a way that I can only describe as embarrassed, not for me, but by me. The wedding party had mostly retreated inside. Marcus was inside. I could hear faintly that the party was continuing. Someone had put music on. "She's going to be fine," my mother said to Amber, as though Amber were the one who needed reassurance. "Claire has always been sensitive. This is probably just—" "Mom," I said. It came out barely above a whisper because breathing still hurt. "Please stop." She stopped. But the expression on her face didn't change. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. In that 7 minutes, my father told me twice to try to stand up, and twice I could not. The pain in my left side had settled into something specific and grinding that got worse every time I inhaled. My left arm was tingling in a way that frightened me. I had enough medical knowledge from my work to know that tingling was not a good sign. The paramedics were professional and thorough. They asked me questions. They assessed me carefully. One of them, a woman, looked up at my parents at one point and said, "How long ago did this happen?" "Just now," my mother said. "Just a few minutes ago." The paramedic looked at me. I could tell she was reading something in my face, in my body, in the situation. She said, "We're going to take her in for imaging." "Is that really necessary?" my father said. The paramedic looked at him with the steady patience of someone who had encountered this kind of question before. "Yes," she said. "It is. They took me to Memorial Health in Savannah. My parents did not come in the ambulance. My mother said she would follow in the car. I lay in the back of the ambulance with Amber, who had gotten in without asking anyone's permission, and I thought about how strange it was that a woman I had met 4 hours ago was the only person who had treated my pain as real. The emergency room was efficient. They got me into imaging within an hour. I had X-rays and then a CT scan, and then I lay in a curtained bay and waited. And the waiting was the worst part because I was alone. Amber had gone to get coffee and the pain had not lessened, and I had a lot of time to think about all the other times in my life I had lain somewhere hurting and been told I was fine. The ER doctor came back with results that I was not prepared for. 2 fractured ribs on my left side. Not cracked. fractured. One of them had fractured in a way that the doctor said was concerning for potential lung involvement, meaning a fragment had shifted close enough to my left lung that they wanted to monitor me overnight, and a moderate concussion from the impact of my head against the cobblestone, which I hadn't even fully registered because the rib pain had been so consuming. The doctor was a calm, methodical man who explained everything to me twice and made sure I understood. He said the rib fractures would heal on their own over 6 to 8 weeks with rest. He said the concussion required monitoring and rest, and no screens for at least a week. He said the potential lung involvement was the part that had them concerned enough to admit me. "How did this happen?" he asked. He asked it in the careful, neutral way that doctors are trained to ask. I told him. All of it, the fall, the height, the cobblestone, the 7 minutes on the ground. I told him that my father had told me to stand up twice. The doctor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to make sure I understand. You were on the ground, unable to breathe, with what turned out to be fractured ribs and a concussion, and someone was asking you to stand up?" "My father," I said. "Yes." He wrote something in my chart. He said, "I'm going to have someone from our patient advocate team come speak with you." My parents arrived at the hospital an hour after I had been admitted. They came into my bay together, and my mother looked at the IV in my arm and the monitoring equipment, and her face did something complicated that might have been guilt and might have been irritation. My father stood at the foot of the bed with his hands in his pockets. "What did they say?" he asked. I told him. 2 fractured ribs. Concussion. Overnight monitoring for lung involvement. There was a silence. "Well," my father said. "Marcus didn't mean to. You know that." I looked at him. "I know," I said. "That's not really the point right now." "The wedding is tomorrow," my mother said. It wasn't a question or a statement of fact. It was a reminder. A request dressed up as information. "I'm aware," I said. "You'll be okay to be there," she said. It was also not a question. I lay in a hospital bed with 2 fractured ribs and a concussion and possible lung involvement, and my mother was asking me to confirm that I would make it to her son's wedding the next day. I want you to understand that this did not shock me. That is the part that should shock you, that it did not shock me, because it was completely consistent with everything that had come before it. "I don't know," I said. "I'm in the hospital." My father made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a word. He and my mother exchanged a look over my bed, that I had seen them exchange 1,000 times, the look that meant Claire is being difficult again. They left an hour later. My father said they needed to get back to the rehearsal dinner venue to help with some logistics. My mother said she would call in the morning. They both kissed me on the forehead, which felt surreal, and they left. Amber came back with terrible hospital coffee and sat with me until 11 o'clock. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She just stayed, and that was the most anyone had done for me that evening. I did not make it to the wedding. I was discharged the following afternoon. The wedding was at noon, and by the time I was in a cab back to the hotel, it was nearly 3 o'clock. I lay in my hotel room and I cried, and I want to be honest with you about what I was crying about. I was not crying because I missed the wedding. I was crying because I had been lying on cobblestone for 7 minutes while my parents stood above me and waited for me to stop being inconvenient, and I had been doing a version of that my entire life, and lying in that hotel room it became impossible to pretend otherwise. My phone had texts from Dana that said things like, "Mom said you're being dramatic about the hospital and you really couldn't have made it for even an hour?" I put my phone face down on the nightstand and did not look at it again that evening. Marcus texted me once. It said, "Hope you feel better. Crazy night, lol." I stared at that text for a long time. Here is what I have learned. In the years I have spent working adjacent to the medical field, about fractured ribs, they are extraordinarily painful. They are considered one of the most painful common injuries because the ribcage moves with every breath, every small motion of the torso, and there is no way to immobilize it. For 6 to 8 weeks after my fall, every breath I took was a reminder. Every time I laughed or coughed or tried to roll over in bed, I was reminded. I flew back to Denver 2 days after the wedding. I managed the airport and the flight alone, with 2 fractured ribs and a concussion, because there was no one to help me. My parents were still in Savannah. Dana had gone back to her life. Marcus was on his honeymoon. My therapist, a woman I have been seeing for 4 years named Doc Reeves, cleared her afternoon schedule when I told her what had happened. We spent 2 hours going through it, and at the end she said something to me that I want to share with you because it reframed everything. She said, "The injury isn't only to your ribs, Claire. The injury is to the part of you that kept expecting something different." I sat with that for a long time. 3 weeks after the wedding, when I was still sleeping with a pillow pressed against my left side and still taking pain medication every 6 hours, I got a call from my mother. She wanted to know if I was going to apologize to Marcus. I asked her what I would be apologizing for. She said that I had made a scene at his rehearsal dinner, that I had gotten Amber involved and caused disruption, and that Marcus had felt terrible about the accident, and that I needed to reach out and let him know there were no hard feelings. I was very quiet on that phone call for a very long time, and then I said, "Mom, I had fractured ribs, I had a concussion, I was hospitalized overnight." She said, "I know, and we're all sorry that happened, but Claire, you know how you are. You always make things bigger than they need to be." I think about that sentence a lot. You know how you are. I had a stack of discharge papers from Memorial Health University Medical Center that described in clinical, objective, irrefutable language exactly what had happened to my body, and my mother was on the phone telling me I knew how I was. The gap between those two things, between the documented medical reality and the version my family had constructed, was not new. It was just newly, starkly visible to me in a way I could no longer look away from. I told my mother I had to go. I called Dr. Reeves, and then I called an attorney. I want to be careful here about what I tell you, because some of these matters are still technically open. What I can tell you is that I filed an incident report. I can tell you that the documentation from Memorial Health, the imaging results, the attending physician's notes, the patient advocate's records told a story that was clear and specific and completely at odds with the version my family had presented to themselves and to each other. I can tell you that when my attorney sent a formal letter, things became very quiet very quickly on my family's end. I can also tell you that my father called me 6 weeks after that letter arrived. It was the first time he had called me, not texted, called in. I couldn't tell you how long. He sounded different on the phone. Smaller, somehow. He said that they wanted to handle things privately, within the family. I told him I understood. I also told him that I was not interested in handling things within a family that had decided, while I lay on cobblestone, that the more pressing concern was the wedding timeline. That was the last conversation I have had with my father. I did not make that decision lightly. I want you to understand that. I have spent 31 years wanting a different family. I have spent a significant portion of my adult life and a significant amount of money in therapy trying to figure out how to love people who were not capable of loving me the way I needed to be loved. Cutting contact with my parents was not something I did in anger. I did it the way you make any decision that costs you something real, carefully, slowly, and with the full knowledge of what it meant. Marcus and I have not spoken. Dana and I have what I would describe as a cautious, distant cordiality. She has never said she believes me. She has also never said she doesn't. We exist in an uncomfortable middle space that might be the best either of us can manage right now. What I want to tell you, and this is the part that I needed the most, in those early months, and couldn't find anywhere, is that there is no version of this story where healing is fast or clean. My ribs healed in 8 weeks. The rest of it has taken longer and is still ongoing. Some days I feel clear and strong and genuinely proud of the life I have built outside of that family system. Some days I wake up and the grief of it is right there waiting for me, heavy and specific, and I have to just let it be there. But I breathe through it, carefully, deliberately, which, if you have ever had fractured ribs, you know is the only way to breathe. And slowly, the breathing gets easier. If you are watching this and you have a family member who has minimized your pain physically, emotionally, in any form, I want you to hear this clearly. Your pain is real. It does not require their acknowledgement to be real. The medical record does not lie. Your body does not lie. And you do not owe anyone a version of your own experience that makes them more comfortable. I opened my own laptop and began writing this story the night I got home from my attorney's office. I am not the Claire my family spent 31 years deciding I was. I know who I am now. I have the paperwork to prove what happened to my body, and I have the harder, slower, more important work of proving to myself that I deserve better, which, it turns out, is the only proof that actually matters. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've experienced something similar, I want to hear from you in the comments. You are not alone, and you are not dramatic, and you are not too sensitive. You are someone whose pain deserved to be taken seriously, it still does,